If you want to make an American angry, it doesn't matter where their politics lie, right?
Yeah.
If you say that companies and the state is going to take your land, and if you say that the people you voted for can't give you information because they signed a document with the company, brother, that's all you need. That's going to make anybody mad. It's going to strike a nerve, and we're seeing that, right? It doesn't matter what they feel about the environmental impacts of a data center. It doesn't matter, how much they are pro-jobs or pro-industry. It doesn't matter. If they're signing NDAs and taking land, nobody's okay with it.
Thank you for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, regulatory actions, and political maneuvers in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact your freedoms.
Please support the State of Freedom by becoming a monthly supporter or member of the Warrior Circle, or by advertising your business, your nonprofit, or your event with us. Go to freedomstate.us. We are bypassing the mainstream media cartel and the establishment political parties in Louisiana and coming directly to you, spreading the uncensored voice of freedom across Louisiana and beyond. I went to Red Zeppelin yesterday with my second oldest son, Eli, and I got this large veggie pizza, which is the best in Baton Rouge. Red Zeppelin is the best kept secret, but because of us, it's really not a secret anymore. Anybody who has not been to Red Zeppelin on Perkins Road in Baton Rouge, you're truly missing out. The best environment, the best service, and the best pizza in the state of Louisiana. Go to Red Zeppelin today. Tell them the State of Freedom sent you.
All right, we'll get there eventually. Some small details. First of all, the stream has failed on Facebook and YouTube, so we're going to get an announcement up on that, but we're only streaming live right now on X and Rumble for some unknown reason, but we shall prevail. At least 121 people who work inside the governor's office have signed lifelong non-disclosure agreements. The language is sweeping. Information of any nature whatsoever, the restrictions never expire. Violate them and you can be fired or sued even after you leave. The governor himself signed one with Meta, and he's not alone. At least 54 elected officials, including leaders of both legislative chambers and a majority of the state senate, have also signed NDAs with Louisiana Economic Development related to major infrastructure or industrial projects. Former aides under the previous administration say nothing like this existed before, and one calls it a gag order designed to create a culture of fear. Today, we're welcoming Drew Hawkins, investigative reporter with Gulf State Newsroom, to walk us through his findings and tell us what shocked him the most. This is the State of Freedom. It's 10 a.m. Central. It's Tuesday, August 18th. I'm Danielle Walker, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, the watchdog-in-chief of Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, Chris Alexander, and we're coming to y'all live, as always, on Voice of the People USA TV and radio network, on Rumble, X, and even though the other ones failed, we will get them up later on YouTube and Facebook, but please take a moment to hit the thumbs up, share this with your friends. It helps us out with the algorithms. You can also catch us later Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, wherever you watch the audio-only podcast. All right. We're off to a good start this morning. We're off to a great start.
Stumbling toward ecstasy.
Here we go. Welcome, Drew. Save me from myself.
No,
How are you?
One of those technical difficulty with the construction guy graphics.
Exactly.
It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
Right, exactly.
It is going to be great. But thank you.
Yeah.
We're so thrilled to have you with us this morning, Drew. Thanks for taking the time. I just mentioned to you off air that we'll start out with the scripture of the day. So let me do that and get us on better footing, and then we'll get into all things Louisiana treachery. Let's see. All right. Today is Romans chapter 1, verse 8. And it says, I give thanks to God for all of you because the testimony of your strong Persistent faith is spreading throughout the world. Every day I read or watch something that shocks me. Sometimes it's from you, Drew. I was texting with a friend yesterday making this exact point. He had shared a podcast with me that absolutely shredded the financial facade of the Hyperion data center and showed, using the Wall Street Journal article, that financially that deal is an absolute house of cards. And, we learn stuff like this every single day. And if we're not careful, we can get into despair. Some of us might get into rage. Some of us might just check out of politics completely and current events. But, and that does need to happen, right? We do need to check out from time to time. But if we check out permanently, it's not the answer, because that's why we're in the shape we're in as a state right now. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with faith. Our faith in God, our faith that God is absolutely good, that he's absolutely trustworthy, and he's absolutely just. He sees everything, and he hears our prayers. Because of our faith, the joy of the Lord can be our strength, and we can keep going, knowing in our hearts that the God of David is our same God today. And we can, as we do our work and as we pray, we can claim the words of Psalm 37, 10 through 17 as our own. And I needed this morning. Just a little while longer and the ungodly will vanish. You will look for them in vain. But the humble of heart will inherit every promise and enjoy abundant peace. Let the wicked keep plotting against the godly with all their sneers and arrogant jeers. God doesn't lose any sleep over them, and he knows their day is coming. Evil ones take aim on the poor and helpless. They're ready to slaughter those who do right. But the Lord will turn all their weapons of wickedness back on themselves, piercing their pride-filled hearts until they're helpless. It's much better to have a little combined with much of God than to have the fabulous wealth of the wicked and nothing else. For the Lord takes care of all his forgiven ones, while the strength of the evil will surely slip away.
Danielle, it's really interesting, the part of the scripture where you say it's better to have a little and to be working on the side of truth, working on the side of justice, working on the side of God, than to have everything and not be working for truth and righteousness and justice, So that's a very powerful point. And it just reminds me, and you really can't emphasize this enough, we can't do everything.
Yeah.
We have to stay in our own lane, do what we can do, and be faithful to our own mission and trust others to do their part in their own sphere. So I encourage that. And, speaking of someone, Danielle, who is really, really doing great work within his own sphere on this is Drew Hawkins, which is why it's such a privilege to have him on today to talk about, the treachery, these NDAs, the Public Service Commission, these data centers and all of that, and we're going to get deep into that. But Drew, we really, really appreciate you being with us today on the State of Freedom, sir.
No, I'm happy to be here. And Danielle, it's so interesting that you opened with Romans 1:8. It's a scripture that my mom sends me a lot because I had, if you remember, the Jesus Freak Bibles when I was in youth church, and I remember in that, I think it was maybe NIV translation, and I remember it is your faith is reported all over the world, if I remember correctly. And so my mom sends me that one a lot. So it's very, very poignant. It's a really good choice. And, to your point, Chris, we got a lot we could talk about. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm happy to talk through anything you guys want, because, it's a bit of a swirling mess right now. And, I welcome any guidance and clarity through the conversation for sure.
Absolutely. And you certainly have provided a lot of that to us. I got a question to start off here, Drew. Danielle and I first became aware of these non-disclosure agreements, or the right of elected officials to sign them and keep municipal projects secret in 2024 through the passage of legislation, specifically HB 461, which passed substantially in the House, had a really hard time in the Senate, failed once, and then passed barely. But that's when we first became aware of this statutory right of secrecy here. We didn't really know what it was for or what it was about at that time. And then we began to see all of these these NDAs executed in connection with these massive industrial projects. So said, aha, that's the reason why they authorized this statutorily. How did you? And of course, also we became more specifically aware through a lawsuit that you may be familiar with that William Most filed on behalf of Dr. Fareshta Imami over at USL. And you know about that. Basically, she's been essentially driven out because she dared to disclose the results of some scientific investigation she did into Lake Maurepas, and how polluted that place is out there. So, and they didn't like that. USL didn't like that. So I say all that to say this: how did you first discover these non-disclosure agreements, and what were you up to, and how did you come to learn about all of this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I would say the origin for me learning about it, specifically in Louisiana, really, it's really in two ways. One is actually William Most, who you just mentioned. And the second would be reporting that I had seen from Stephanie Regal, reporter at Times-Picayune at NOL.com. And you may have seen this story. It's a really great story. It talks about how the Meta deal came together. And it's a great narrative. It starts at the Washington Mardi Gras and how, when Governor Landry came into office, this project was something they really wanted to land. But mentioned in that story, kind of really subtly, is the idea that there were non-disclosure agreements that were used as part of that deal. And so from there, I was like, okay, well, that seems like a pretty big thing to sort of gloss over there. And so then it led to records requests, which really started the journey. And to your point too, Chris, you've mentioned, the lawsuit that William Most is involved in. There's also another lawsuit in Ascension Parish that's related really specifically to the Hyundai steel plant and the Riverplex complex out there, where I have also faced records request denials. And you also mentioned, state law being changed to allow for these NDAs. I think it's also really important to point out that the public records laws in Louisiana do allow for for not having to disclose what is truly proprietary or trade secret information, which is often the logic you'll receive from elected officials and companies about why NDAs are used. They're used to protect trade secrets. There's several reasons. I'm happy to go through all the reasons that they give for why these are used, but one of the big ones will be protecting proprietary information. But the state law already protects that, which really just kind of eliminates that as a logic that holds water. So once I got the initial batch of records from Louisiana Economic Development, which is a state agency that's focused on attracting businesses to the state. What is normal are NDAs with Louisiana Economic Development and companies. One of the things I wanted to look at as a comparison is what's normal, what's new, what's normal, right? So in addition to the records that I requested since Governor Landry took office in January 2024, I also went 4 years back past that to look at Governor Edwards, the former governor, to see what's different here. Now, under Governor Edwards, Louisiana Economic Development was signing a lot of NDAs with private companies, but there were no elected officials, zero. And so when that happened, whenever I've got my spreadsheet and I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, there are at least 50 that I'm looking at that time. This was back in, January, February. There are at least 50 elected officials here, including, state senators, state representatives, but also going down to parish presidents, school board superintendents, mayors, sheriffs. It was really like, okay, these are people that people voted for to put in office, and they're signing agreements that prevent them from revealing information to their own constituents. And that is when I knew that something was abnormal here.
I wonder if we need to give our elected officials a little primer on what the word proprietary actually means. Because to me, it's just shocking. And when you talk about the public records laws in Louisiana, one thing Chris and I have noted since we've been working together, Chris and I have been working together since 2023, specifically following the legislature, the public records laws have continually and surreptitiously been narrowed and narrowed and narrowed in those short, Chris, 3 years? I mean, is that fair to say? They try and find some new ways every single session to make it to make exceptions to public records on pretty much anything that would concern people.
Very much so, yeah.
I'd love to, just to, if I could, to circle back to one thing you just said, Danielle, which was, educating elected officials about what proprietary trade secret means, right? Because, I've talked to a lot of experts over the past year to try to understand all of these things, right? And one of the things that they point out is that, residents in a community where a data center or a steel mill or an LNG terminal or whatever large development is coming, they don't want to know what is in the secret formula for Coca-Cola or what's in the Big Mac sauce. They don't want to know, how does Hyundai make its steel? They actually don't even want to know what a data center does, right? What they want to know is, what is this huge thing that's showing up in my community? And another thing that I think would be worth elected officials really thinking more deeply through is another logic that's often given for why NDAs are used, which is that this idea of competitiveness. You'll hear this a lot, right?
Yeah.
We're being more competitive. So the idea is, the elected officials sign an NDA, a company like Meta or Hyundai signs an NDA, and now they're both able to sit at the same negotiating table and talk through things like tax incentives, land sales, other things like that. And the idea is, what these NDAs, now we can get them together. The company may not have been willing to do that before. That's the argument you'll receive. But if you think about this for, maybe 3 seconds, what happens is, if officials in Louisiana sign an NDA with Meta, Meta is a international trillion-dollar company. They're looking at all over the place to put their things, right? So Meta's talking to Louisiana, they're talking to Mississippi, they're talking to Ohio, they're talking to Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And if they're signing NDAs, the officials in Louisiana cannot talk to the officials in Mississippi or Ohio or Pennsylvania about what they're offering Meta. So what does that leave? That leaves Meta, the company, at a position to look at all the bids in front of them who can't talk to each other and choose the highest bidder. So this idea really, again, the logic seems to fall apart if you examine it, that if you silo off elected officials with NDAs, you're not being more competitive. You don't know what other people are offering, and so you're throwing up the highest bid, hoping that they'll take your offer, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think,
and it's very much it's just unbelievable. And it's not really, as we know, this is not proprietary information. These are not trade secrets. They're essentially saying, if you disclose anything about what we're doing, if you disclose anything about, any potential effects this could have on citizens of Louisiana, if you disclose, and half the time maybe the elected officials don't even know, then we're just not going to come to Louisiana. We're going to pull out. And
you know what, let me give you an exclusive and a specific example. This is something I haven't reported yet because I don't know where to quite fit it, but it'll happen at some point. And I want to look at our natural resources, right? Because a good example would be Meta with a giant data center. It needs a lot of water.
Yeah.
And just to give you a glimpse of how, I don't want to use the word desperate, but what Louisiana is doing to try to get this company to come here. So Meta needs a lot of water. In Holly Ridge, a little small community in Richland Parish where it's being built, the nearby city is Delhi, and then you have Rayville. They have municipal water supplies. Delhi is also super small, and it can't necessarily just extend its water lines to cover a $50 billion data center's water needs, right?
Right.
So there's an official at LED in internal emails talking to Meta saying, and these are words that I just can't get out of my head. And he says, if you don't need treated water, if all you need is hard water works, there is, quote, buku water about 100 feet beneath the Franklin Farms site, which is the land where Meta is being built. It's the Mississippi alluvial aquifer. He says there is buku water, it's hard water, but it is wet and there's plenty of it. This is a direct quote for him. That Mississippi alluvial aquifer is the same water supply that all the farmers in the area use as well, right? So just to show, how willing the state is to attract this trillion-dollar company at the expense of the agriculture industry that really is the, primary industry in that region. I think that just kind of speaks for itself.
It does. And it's just such a prostitution of our state, Drew. It's disgusting. Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about the Hyperion Data Center. I know you've done a lot of work on this. Last week we saw the PSC meeting where concerned citizens were, basically asking, can you give us a justification for how these 1,000 jobs are going to be created, permanent jobs? Will they be here? Will they be in California? And can you please explain to us, show us the underlying data for how much power would be needed? So that's one thing. And of course, we all saw that the PSC voted without any without any reason given that the people don't deserve to have that basic information. And then a Wall Street Journal article came out, I'm not sure if you saw this week, explaining that Meta is billions and billions of dollars in debt. And it hides this debt through complex off-balance sheet accounting. And for Hyperion, they're using the same exact playbook with their joint venture with Blue Owl, which, by the way, apparently has a horrific reputation on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the infographics from this article, it's absolutely a Ponzi scheme. And there's no money to pay for the data center, and there will be no money to pay for the data center. So putting all that together, Drew, who signed these NDAs? Because specifically for Hyperion, and I think you may have laid that out in your article, but you may have it on hand, because that's who we need to be holding accountable when this house of cards comes crumbling down on the taxpayers of Louisiana, especially the people of Richland Parish, who may end up losing their water supply and whose land is being destroyed in the meantime.
Sure, it's a good question, and I'm wondering, do I start at the top or at the bottom? Because at the bottom you've got your
the bottom.
Well, at the bottom you've got your local officials, your police juries, your mayors, your city council, those sorts of folks. Moving up from there, you have your elected officials that represent the state. Multiple signed it. We also, not even getting into public records, just things that we know. Through other ways, whether that's reporting or confirming in an interview, things like that.
Yeah.
That Entergy executives signed these as well. But then I think a good example of an elected official that represents that area would be Jay Morris. Jay Morris, as it turns out, also happens to own land that's adjacent to the site. And as the site expands, it needs more land. So then it buys land that Jay Morris owns. So there's a direct, conflict of interest there. Moving up from there, we have, of course, the governor of Louisiana. Jeff Landry signed an NDA directly with Meta. And it is worth, when we use these words, NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, it is worth taking a second to say, hey, NDAs are different. They can be different in many different ways. They can be different in who's signing them, what they cover, how long they last, and what the enforceability is of those NDAs. Now, the ones that we know of from the elected officials, many of those were signed with Louisiana Economic Development. They can vary, but they often have a 2-year timeline. And that, the way Susan Bourgeois, the Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development, has put it to me is that when those projects are publicly announced, the NDAs go away. Now, that hasn't always been really the case in practice.
Let me just say this, Drew. Let me just say this real quick, because I don't mean to interrupt you. But the 2-year time limitation is exactly what is provided for, a total of 24 months in the enabling legislation from 2024. And you're exactly right. At least theoretically, there's supposed to be public disclosure before they begin the actual implementation process.
No, that's a great point. And that makes sense why the state official NDAs through Louisiana Economic Development all have language that matches that state law, right? But there are different ones that the people, that elected officials will sign directly with the company. And so with Governor Landry, for example, that's Meta's NDA generated by their legal department. And that NDA is different than the others. And it says that each have to have written permission in order to talk about the project. And that means that the highest elected official in our state has to check with the company to see if it's okay for him to say something about it. It also has, a specific provision that just sort of tickles me a little bit, which is that you're not allowed to talk about the existence of the NDA. So you can't even confirm or deny that it exists. And I would say, Governor Landry is probably the highest in our minds, but also, in a bureaucratic technical level, up above him at the federal level, we have Representative Julia Letlow, who signed the exact same document that Governor Landry signed with Meta's internal NDA. And as you know, and as I know from the reporting, Julia Letlow then bought stock in Meta. Whether or not she used information gained through that, we don't know. They don't answer my questions. But the timeline does seem pretty suspect to sign an NDA with the company, then buy stock in the company during a window where the public is unaware because it hasn't been publicly announced, right?
Yeah. To this point, Drew, to Julia Letlow, throughout the U.S. Senate campaign, and I'm sure she'll continue as we head into this general election, she's been stating that, look, I don't handle my stock portfolio. I don't know anything about it. And so just take it up basically with my stockbroker because it's arm's length and I don't know anything about it. How do you reconcile that statement with the fact that she, in June, as you said, of 2024, personally signed a non-disclosure agreement with respect to this very project we're talking about? It wasn't her stock manager who signed that NDA. It was her. And then within 2 or 3 months after that, as you've also pointed out, she's purchasing stock in NVIDIA and in Meta. So, is there any way to reconcile her stated detachment from all of this and the fact that she personally signed an NDA? And why would a federal official be signing an NDA with respect to a state economic development project to begin with?
Sure. No, there's a couple of things there, Chris. So immediately the distinction, as you're saying, is the NDA. That is what distinguishes this instance from other instances of things that appear to be insider trading. And that defense that Julia Letlow, or at least a spokesperson, gave to me, which has been used before as this has been brought up with her late disclosures. And my understanding is I think she was actually late for the disclosure, the financial disclosure of the current Senate race right now. So it's a trend that seems to be continuing. But that defense of I don't have any involvement is very common in those contexts. I mean, you can, and this is also, this is a pretty bipartisan thing. I mean, you can look at Nancy Pelosi, who will often say, that's not me, my husband manages our stock portfolio. And I don't know what your marriage is like, Chris, but if I was making trades without my wife knowing about it, it would not be okay.
Trouble in paradise.
Yeah. That defense is almost standard, right? And, it is interesting, too, that Representative Letlow did vote for the bill that passed the House that would ban this practice of legislators, making trades, really, I think, at all. But she's also, there's also already in place is a law called the Stock Act, which requires disclosures in a certain timeline, which she also failed to disclose along those timelines. But the big distinction here is that NDA, because it's one thing to sit on a House committee where you learn information and then you use that information to then make investments. Now, to be clear, that's something Letlow also has done, where she has sat in House committees and then within 2 days made trades with companies that would have been relevant to the information learned in that House meeting. But here we have an agreement that prohibits her from discussing what negotiations or what information she learned, including financial terms and things like that are included in the document. That is the big distinction here. It's one thing to use information you learn through a committee process as being part of the government. That's also a problem, to be clear. But if you're getting specific information from a specific company and then you buy stock in that company, I mean, it kind of just, you got to call a spade at a certain point, right? That's really the kind of key difference here. And all of the ethics experts that I've spoken to, including some that at one point worked in the House Office of Ethics, right? That their job was to look into these things. They all immediately, that's their first question. Why did she sign an NDA? First of all, why did she sign an NDA, period, with a private company, a company that's also a federal lobbyist that has spent more than $25 million in 2025 lobbying the federal government? But to your point, Chris, why is she involved in a local state project at all that has no federal involvement? Even if it is in her district, she's a federal official. It has nothing to do with a state infrastructure or a state industrial development like this. So all of these things combined just point to something being off, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And Drew, and she's actually stated that why would you be accusing me of being involved in my fiance's lobbying efforts, who's knee deep in these industrial development projects, specifically CCS? I'm a federal official. I don't really have anything to do with that. And I don't believe that they should be able to use eminent domain. So on the one hand, she's trying to argue, leave me alone about all this. And then on the other hand, she's specifically signing a non-disclosure agreement about it. Doesn't this, Drew, create, on a practical level, a conflict of interest? Assuming she is going to speak out about this and talk about how great these data centers are going to be and actually speak at the public statement where they announced the project, as you have pointed out, how can we really trust what she as a federal official is saying regarding the pros and cons of this if she has a vested financial interest and an incentive in seeing that the company's stock rises. It just seems like that in and of itself is a direct conflict of interest.
Well, and it sounds like she might have to run her talking points by Meta's public affairs office before she even says them.
Yeah, I mean, according to the language in the document, that's actually, no joke. That's what it says,
Wow.
She has to get handwritten permission that it's okay for her to talk about it.
Imagine if our elected officials needed handwritten permission from their constituents.
Yeah, there exactly, Danielle. Drew, I want to get back to a second. Danielle brought up the Public Service Commission, and we're always hearing two things. It's going to increase, it will diminish our ability to compete if we have to disclose all this stuff, and also this involves proprietary information, our intellectual property, our trade secrets, and so forth. You were at the actual public service, the actual hearing where the administrative law judge considered all the arguments with regard to this and whether or not this information had to be disclosed. And from what I can understand, her opinion very much took that into account, was carefully crafted, actually denied 3 of the 5 disclosure requests. So I just want you to disabuse people of the notion that, hiding behind the trade secrets intellectual property argument is just not valid.
Yeah, I would say that you're referring to the administrative law judge who, ruled that Meta needed to turn that information over. The PSC, of course, voted to overturn that ruling, but it is worth pointing out that this is not some activist judge, right? It was a very measured, well-considered opinion that she wrote. And to your point, she didn't grant it wholesale. She had caveats, she had specific, considered ruling. And that is often what the PSC wants. When something is contentious or complicated and it needs another set of eyes, another legal set of eyes, they like to refer things to the administrative law judge. It's a very common procedure thing to do. It's someone who is specifically focused on legal aspects of something, gives a considered measurement, a considered look at it, and gives an opinion. And that's exactly what happened. The PSC chose to override that, right? And I think, just having been in that hearing, I remember a moment where the judge, there's some complicated wonkiness that I think I can relay relatively well. There, you've got this proprietary trade secret information. That's what Meta is calling how it calculated the number of jobs it will create and the power usage of the facility for why it needs 10 gas plants, right? Meta has not produced that information in a way where the interveners, those are your advocacy groups like Alliance for Affordable Energy, their job is to look out for ratepayers and things like that. They have not released it in a way where those advocacy groups can review it. What they've done is they set a separate designation called Attorney's Eyes Only, which is AEO designation. And what that means is exactly what it sounds like, to be honest, is that the interveners' lawyers can review this information. However, they cannot talk to their clients and tell them what that information is. So, when I interviewed and caught up with Philip May at a press conference last week and asked him about this, his justification was, well, their attorneys can see it so that they can mount an adequate legal defense and that sort of thing. But those ratepayer advocacy groups that are looking out for your average Louisianan's utility bills, right? They aren't able to see it. They aren't able to disseminate it. They aren't able to tell you and I what Meta says it did to calculate those jobs and that electricity usage, right?
So, Drew, how do the clients know? Obviously, the lawyers have a fiduciary and an ethical duty,
and one they take
clients.
Seriously too. They're not like wink, wink. Guess how many jobs, and I'll blink twice if you're close. No, they take it very seriously. They don't disclose it because they cannot under the law, right?
Unbelievable.
And just to kind of put a finer point on that judge in the hearing asked Meta's lawyers, asked Entergy's lawyers, hey, I did my own research. I had my team looking around. We've never seen this designation in a utility case like this before.
Wow.
This attorney's eyes only. Is this common? The Entergy lawyer said, no, we've never done it in Louisiana. And Meta said, no, this is common. Although the judge herself could not find other examples of it, specifically as well in the southeast area. So, this is a new playbook to try to, essentially find a way to not have that information be released to the public, but to still satisfy the bylines and the laws so that they can say that that information is not being withheld.
Yes, and that's exactly what the Energy representative, I think is Mr. May, said when you gave him this, the sidewalk interview there. The fact that the lawyers, for lawyers' eyes only, so they're entitled to see all the underlying data, but they can't disclose it to anybody, including their own clients, on whose behalf they're supposed to be acting, and they have a fiduciary duty to their clients. And so he infers from that the suggestion that this data is not being disclosed is a complete and total lie. It's not a complete and total lie. What good does it do? What good does it do if lawyers are aware of this very, very vital information, but they're not allowed to discuss it with their clients? How do the clients even know whether or not their lawyers are acting on their behalf or in their interest? This seems to go directly to the heart of, an ethical issue with respect to the duty that a lawyer has to their clients. Mm-hmm. And it's unbelievable to me that there would be this contractual restriction regarding communication between a lawyer and their own clients. Don't you find this bizarre?
That's exactly what the lawyers said in those hearings. The lawyers that represent what are called the interveners, including Alliance for Affordable Energy, and there's several others. They said this harms the attorney-client privilege, to your point. Right? I can't discuss certain things with my own clients. That's what that designation means in reality, in practice.
And Drew, you have gone all over the state. You've gone beyond the state looking at this data center issue. One thing I'm really concerned about for Louisiana, for people all over the country who are facing this, is there's going to be a breaking point. People are not just going to sit back and take this forever. So what is the sense that you're getting from the people on the ground, the people who are most closely affected by this? Because I can't imagine it's pleasant.
No, I would say, Danielle, there's never been another thing that I've covered as a reporter that was so bipartisan, right? Let me give you a specific example. Going to Rapides Parish, where they're building Applied Digital is a company building a data center there, totally concealed by NDAs. In the same day, I interviewed a ascribed leftist woman with a shaved head, and then I went down the road and interviewed a former law enforcement with a conservative podcast. Right? And they're both telling me the same things. Now, some of them are concerned about different things related to data centers, whether it's like the environmental impacts and that sort of thing. But this secrecy is this unifying factor that is unlike anything I've ever really seen. I've never had people so happy to have a reporter knocking at their door. You know what I mean?
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
I do.
Absolutely.
Now, but to your point too, I will say, Danielle, like what they're saying is awful. What's happening to them is awful, right? Yeah. They're really upset. They feel betrayed by their elected officials. They feel like suddenly they have dump trucks and 18-wheelers running in front of their elementary schools one day. They just showed up. I say this often because as I'm describing meta to people, and it's something I also try to just keep reflective in my mind because I've spent so much time in Holly Ridge and talked to so many people that live there, is just to imagine what this would have been like from their perspective, where you're in the case of Holly Ridge, you're in a quiet, rural, small country town. The two highways, Highway 80 and 183, are 2 lanes. Highway 80 is a historic, scenic, the Dixie Overland Highway. And, the only traffic you would see there is occasionally if a combine has to go from one field to another, right? That's what they're expecting. And then suddenly, one day, an army of 18-wheelers and dump trucks are coming down the road constantly. They're dropping rocks. They're breaking your windshields. I've heard multiple people tell me they're scared to death to pull out of their driveways. It takes them an hour to get to their doctor's appointments now. They close the playground in front of the school because the trucks are running into it. Can you imagine if that just suddenly happened to where you live one day? It's kind of it's a surreal thing to think about.
It is
surreal. It really is. It really is surreal. And I actually saw, a video where you were interviewing different people in that area. And you're exactly right, Drew. It seems like there is universal opposition to this. No doubt about it.
And hold on, Chris, before you go, I just want to go a little bit more on that point because it's something that we're seeing. It's like the government has completely put no parameters around any of these projects for these companies, have given no oversight. We were talking to, at least I was talking to a gentleman who is in a completely different part of the state where they are doing the LNG terminal. And he's talking about how they've completely destroyed the oyster beds. The oyster fishermen can't do their work. and the state has no response, the company has no response. And so, and that, I don't even know if there had been any NDAs around that, because it's, it was a different kind of project. Maybe there was, you might know about it.
Some of the newer ones, yeah. But some of those older ones, before Landry came into office, I don't think they were necessarily operating under NDAs.
But I'd love to get your sense for what's Louisiana's track record with the way they deal with these industrial projects? Because to me, it seems like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I'm hearing the same kinds of stories, no matter what part of the state people are from, no matter if it's CCS, an LNG terminal, an AI data center, a steel plant. It's like the same kind of secrecy, destruction, ignoring the locals' concerns, and ignoring the decimation of the existing industry.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good question, and to answer part of it, I would say that as far as like the track record aspect of the question, I mean, we're home to Cancer Alley, right? I mean, that's not by accident. And it's also not new, and it's also not unknown, and it's indisputable. It's real, right? So the track record question, I would say, I would look at the petrochemical industry. And the emphasis that the state will give to those companies. What I would say too, and this is a little bit of conjecture, a little less difficult to prove, but I suspect that the usage of these types of agreements to keep people quiet come at a time where information is so easily shared and available. Right? I mean, I'll be honest, like some of the sources and some of the people that I've connected with it's around these projects, I found them on TikTok and Instagram. Yeah. They were posting and talking about it. I mean, you guys have a show here where you're exploring these things deeply. I think maybe 20 years ago, it would have been tougher to do this independently. Shannon McManus, the law enforcement officer that I mentioned in Rapides Parish, he's got a show where he's talking about this kind of stuff. And I feel like that is part of it here, is that information, you've got it right here. You can just put something out on video, right? And I think that is kind of shaping how our governments and how these companies operate. They know that if something gets out, it's not going to be good for them. And one of the tools they're using are these agreements that prevent you from sharing information, right? Yeah. And then, of course, as soon as these developments do become kind of knowledge. I mean, if you look at SpaceX, which we still don't know much about it, but we do know some things, like looking at private jet data. Okay, we see Elon Musk is flying over here. Okay, we see Governor Landry's in Texas. Okay, we see Jeff Bezos flew here. Okay, and then we have people in Acadiana posting videos about what they're experiencing and what they're seeing. So I think that part of it is just that it's a natural, adaptation to the information climate we exist in now, which can sometimes be overwhelming and over the top. Sure. But at the same time, it's also this is a brand new era for our species, right? To be able to just broadcast what's happening right now in real time. Yeah. And I think these agreements are part of addressing that worry from the state and the company's perspective.
You're saying that basically what you're saying is that the need for these NDAs, because of the technological sophistication that exists now in our society, the need to lock down these agreements and the details of these agreements behind these NDAs is that much more critical for them to advance these projects.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at data centers, there was a Gallup poll recently that said 70% of Americans are against the data center in their community, right? So they know these are unpopular. They're not dumb, right? Yeah. They know, they can read the room. They know what their constituents are saying, especially when they're vocal, especially when they have whether it's a platform or they are platformed, and their concerns and what they're experiencing is getting elevated to where people are aware of it. They know that something is unpopular, and this is one way that they've come up with to keep that information under wraps.
Yeah. What they don't know is that they're signing their own political death warrant. I don't think they know that.
I think I'm really, of course, that is something I'm fascinated to see. What do we see next legislative session? What do we see in the elections this fall? What do we see in future elections going forward? We have examples in other places, like in Missouri, where a city council approved a data center under NDAs. That was reported. People got upset. They were all kicked out of office like the next week or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I believe that a pushback is not only coming, it's happening. But I think that what we'll see is when we get to those key critical stages of like elections, that's when we'll see how heavy is it, right? You know,
it looks like, Drew, and it looks like some of these officials who signed these NDAs see the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
Because I believe a number of them have expressed emphatic desire to rescind their NDAs, right?
Yeah, and that's something, you know, Sam Carlin at Times-Picayune reported that story very well. And what's really interesting about that particular story, too, is, you know, one of the particular officials that did this, her name's Joy Walters in North Louisiana. She had signed an NDA around the Amazon data center in Caddo and Bossier parishes. And I remember when I was starting on the first story I did back this spring, which opens in Bossier and Caddo, and it starts on the Amazon data center, and then we get into all the NDAs everywhere, right? When I was talking to people in Shreveport, and I was saying, hey, I'm looking at this data center, there's a lot of NDAs here. One of them asked, do you mind sending me a list of all the officials that sign an NDA? And so I sent them a list, and I was like, you know, Joy Walters was one of them. And I remember very clearly, they were like, wait, Joy Walters, she said she was against this, like she wouldn't do this. And I'm like, I sent them the document. I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. That's her signature. She's right here. And in that article that Sam Carlin reported, her reasoning for getting out of that was pressure from her constituents, right? Wow. So, you know, and whether or not it matters in the minds of elected officials, it certainly matters in the minds of voters and the people that live in these places, right?
Yeah, it sure does.
And Drew, we have I just want to mention this, Danielle, before you go on, along the lines of Danielle mentioned, you know, political pushback. We can't forget, I believe it's South Dakota as well, and it's not on data centers, but it's on carbon capture and sequestration, where all of these legislators voted for eminent domain, voted to allow all these CCS pipelines and storage in their state. Well, in the next election cycle, there were 14 or 15 pro-CCS Republicans that were driven out of office up in South Dakota. So I think there's at least a plausible reason to think that we're going to have some similar electoral results here.
Oh, yeah. And I would say, like, if you want to make an American angry, it doesn't matter where their politics lie, right? Yeah. If you say that companies and the state is going to take your land, and if you say that the people you voted for can't give you information because they signed a document with a company, brother, that's all you need. That's going to make anybody mad. It's going to strike a nerve, and we're seeing that, right? It doesn't matter what they feel about the environmental impacts of a data center. It doesn't matter, you know, how much they are pro-jobs or pro-industry. It doesn't matter. If they're signing NDAs and taking land, nobody's okay with it.
Nobody's okay with it. You're so right. You're absolutely right. I did want to mention to you one thing, just in case you weren't aware, with respect to the SpaceX project. Chris and I were following this piece of legislation this past session. You'll remember the number, Chris, but I know that it was Representative McFarland that carried it, and it was a complete prohibition on all public records requests related to aerospace. Aerospace. Within the, it wasn't just contracts. I think it was aerospace. Yeah, exactly. Right? I know. So this is how we find out. So we know their playbook. First, you got to pass the law to conceal it, and then we'll tell you. Then we'll show you what it is later. And
it's the same thing with Meta, too, where they inserted a tax break for data centers into a separate bill that was unrelated to data centers in order to specifically court Meta to come here, because that was one of Meta's hangups was, well, you guys don't have a tax incentive for data centers. Entergy's CEO, Philip May, said, no problem, I'll make that happen. And then we had several legislators that made that happen kind of under the radar because it was a pretty small bill, but obviously it's had huge implications. So, yeah, Danielle, I would say keep your eye on the legislature. And if something doesn't look right, or you're like, well, I wonder what that could be, it could mean that something's coming.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be sending up flares to you next time.
Yes, indeed, we will. Big time flares. Let me touch on one thing here, Drew, before you go, because this was brought up by one of the ladies who testified at the recent Public Service Commission hearing. Is it your understanding that there is no binding requirement at this point that Meta or these huge data centers provide any certain, no legal requirement or statutory requirement that they provide a certain number of permanent Louisiana jobs in exchange for these massive tax credits that they are getting because that requirement was repealed. So essentially, they're not under any requirement to perform, either with respect to a certain number of jobs or with regard to the amount of data that they offload to Louisiana ratepayers. They don't have any legally binding requirements being imposed upon them, do they?
That specific question, I am not 1,000% sure on. I will say, though, that we have seen before where large infrastructure investments didn't pan out. There are several examples in Louisiana. And what happens when that happens, when the deal falls through, the company moves on, is ratepayers, people who pay electricity bills, all of us, then have to foot the bill for that infrastructure that was put in place there. So on the idea of are there state requirements, is there statutory, is there law that they have to provide an X number of jobs in order to receive? I'm not 1,000% sure on. That's something I could look into and try to feel a little more confident on answering. But I will say that one thing I do know is that if this stuff if this is a bubble that bursts, right? I mean, one thing that's been really interesting talking with people across Louisiana, as you know, a lot of people work in oil and gas. So they've seen what a boomtown looks like. They know what it looks like. They've lived them and they've worked in them. Yeah. And so a lot of the guys that work in the oil and gas that I talk to and ask about, well, what happens if, one of the things they ask about is what happens if Meta moves on? What happens if if the AI isn't this as big of a thing as they're saying it's going to be, or this infrastructure is not needed? Then what will be left then, right? And also, who has to pay for that infrastructure that the state's making, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. A last question for me, and then Danielle, whatever you have follow-up. I just want to give you an opportunity here before you go, Drew, to sort of explain from the perspective. I know you talked about, all these massive trucks coming in and they're, kind of destroying the roads and breaking people's windshields with these massive trucks and the traffic issues and so forth. But just kind of from a more broad scale view, what are the risks to Louisiana citizens, particularly in the rural communities where these massive projects are going to go up? What are the potential risks to them, and why are they so profoundly concerned about this?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the immediate impacts of the construction, so the truck traffic, that sort of thing, which is a very, very real risk that could be mitigated and doesn't have to be the way that they're doing it now, right? They could build these new roads, they could build these bypass lanes, they could do that before they start sending in thousands of trucks. But the real thing here is the electricity usage, the water usage, the infrastructure costs, which, the way Louisiana is set up, this is not uncommon, this is most states, where we have a monopoly on our utility companies. Entergy is the biggest one. You've got Cleco, you've got Northeast Power, you've got these other ones, but really for these big projects, it's Entergy. They're a private company, so they're going to recoup their costs. Also, they're going to pass on costs so that it doesn't affect their bottom line.
Yeah.
And look, I mean, I don't have to tell you guys, there are a lot of people living in these rural communities that are not making a killing right now.
Yeah.
Especially if they're farmers. I mean, just look at how tariffs have impacted them, how market trends have impacted them, how active things right now with the Strait of Hormuz and fertilizer prices and that sort of thing, on top of what they're already dealing with, declines and aging out and all these things. Adding, I think the one calculation, there was like $8 for one of the Meta's power plants that'll power, one of the gas plants that'll power it. $8 is not nothing, and that's not the end of it, right?
Right.
So if it's affecting your water bills, your utility bills, when people right now are hurting, you guys know this, people are hurting right now. Yeah. And adding new expenditures to their bills in the name of a company that's worth trillions of dollars, so that they will be more willing to then set up shop here, I think is really, really something that people are concerned about. People are concerned about the real things in their real lives. Bills are real things in their real lives. The air they breathe is a real thing in their real life. The water they drink is a real thing in their real life. So that's what I hear a lot about, that people are worried about. They don't get into the wonky politics about how these deals were made. They want to know what the reality of what's in front of them and what's showing up in their communities.
And as you said, Drew, the line in the sand, the government officials entering into these agreements, hiding the details of these agreements from the people, and then, of course, also eminent domain where they can use and take your property for these projects. That's the line in the sand that I think is really going to provoke the ire
Yeah.
and is provoking the ire.
And there are
of citizens.
softer lines too that I think maybe people may not catch at first, but we'll see over time. Like, for example, a lot of these are payment in lieu of taxes, pilot agreements that can give tax incentives. A lot of those taxes fund your schools,
Right.
which is why they have school boards and superintendents signing NDAs to learn about these projects, because it's going to affect their bottom line on what they're able to pay for with their schools. So your education quality, the facilities, the amount of teachers you can hire, even if you see a $50,000 pay bump in Richland Parish because of pre-existing law that then allowed for that to happen, that's nice in the short term. But over time, when people live over generations in these areas and they send their kids to the same schools, and if those schools' funding is being cut, again, not like Louisiana schools are killing it right now, right? And if you have these companies that are then taking away some of that funding source for the schools in the name of these large developments that may also be affecting their quality of life, whether it's air, water, traffic, all those things, I think that's also just going to be something that people are really upset about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had talked to someone else about the fire. The fire station has to cover this massive, what is it now, 1,700 football fields is the size of the Hyperion data center. How are they going to do that?
The same thing, and that's same thing happening in Rapides Parish in Boyce, which is about 20 miles outside of Alexandria, where they're trying to get Boyce to extend their lines. And again, not to beat a dead horse here, but Boyce is not killing it right now. So a couple $1 million to extend their water lines to cover fire at a facility for a company that's worth billions, it doesn't seem fair to me. But what do I know? Right. What I mean?
Well, here's
It
the
really
thing.
doesn't.
The company's worth billions on paper, but that's just paper. I
Sure.
mean, I think what's proprietary in all of this is their complex and completely probably illegal accounting methods to show that you or I would not be able to get a mortgage with the kind of balance sheet that they have. You go to the bank and say, look, I'd like to, look at all this money on paper, and they'll say, okay, but what are you going to put into the bank? And there's nothing. That's what we're looking at with this company. So
And I think, even on a larger perspective, what we're looking at is just a even more stark, clear division in class, right?
Yeah.
These are not people like you and I, right? They live in a different world. They operate differently. Debt to them doesn't mean what debt means to us. You know what I mean? And we're seeing this kind of growing resentment and this growing frustration from the rest of us, and we're seeing, we're at income inequalities that are well past the French Revolution levels.
Yeah.
The amount of money that the 1% in this country has is unbelievable. When you look at some of the disparities when it comes to health, food, school, livelihood, jobs, income, all of these things. I think you said earlier we've got to be reaching a breaking point.
Yeah.
I feel like, I don't know how much longer people are going to put up with not only just the day-to-day of their lives that they see this disparity in income and how much the haves have and how little the have-nots have, but when they see also their governments giving away the little that they have in their tax revenue and that sort of thing, their tax base, giving that away. And they're not going to be getting, it's not like Meta is going to be handing out paychecks to people, no matter how many back-to-school backpack drives they do.
Right.
It's not going to make a meaningful difference in people's lives except to harm it.
Very, very good point. It's like they're getting everything that they want here, and they're not being required to verify or to justify through actual empirical data the proclamations that they're making about how great this is going to be for the state and for these communities. It's extraordinary the extent to which our elected officials are allowing them to get away with this. William, the lady for the Alliance for Affordable Energy, she was one of the lawyers who testified. I think she said that even the governor and LED and the Public Service Commission and perhaps even Entergy, I don't know, are actually not aware of the actual macro data upon which these conclusions and these proclamations are being made. Is that your understanding, that we have a governor and LED and they're extolling all of this and pushing and promoting all this, and yet they haven't even seen the actual underlying data?
It is entirely possible. Some of this information has been designated attorney's eyes only. So that would be attorneys that are relevant to that case. There was actually, an issue where one of the commissioners who wasn't a lawyer couldn't quite get access. They figured that out, but it just goes to show how unprecedented this kind of designation is. It is entirely possible that Meta has not shared all of that granular data to demonstrate their calculations when it comes to power usage and job creation. It's entirely possible that, like Entergy and like the rest of us, we have to just sort of take their statements at face value. We have to trust this company when they say, oh, it's 1,000 jobs and we need 10 gas plants. We don't have any way to have alternative or outside experts independently review these numbers and this data and see if those calculations are actually correct.
Yeah.
Are you keeping tabs on the PSC to know if any of them are signing NDAs?
Yeah, and so far, none of the commissioners that I've seen have signed NDAs. The only one that has would be the executive assistant. And I asked some of the commissioners about this, like, is that normal? And the way they put it to me was like, well, the executive assistant doesn't really have any sway in our decision making. It's more that they may have been briefed on information that would come before the PSC. And so it's something I can't fully definitively confirm on how significant that is for an assistant at the PSC to do that. But at this stage, and I don't want to say, never, but at this stage, at least with the records that I've obtained, I don't have any PSC commissioners in them.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Drew Hawkins, thank you so much for being with us today. So much to talk about here. We have to have you back on soon to get into more of some of these issues, including a piece of legislation this past session that would have required the PSC, would have required Entergy and Meta to put their money where their mouth is by prohibiting, by law, these data centers from offloading their costs onto Louisiana citizens. And of course, it was defeated in the Commerce Committee. But I want to get your thoughts on that perhaps on the next show. Thank you for all the great work that you do. And, just for being in this fight, it means a lot.
Well, thanks for having me. An hour in, and we really did just scratch the surface here. So, holler at me. I'd be happy to come back on.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for being in the fight. Like Chris said, you're doing great work.
And, one thing I would also say, too, to all of your listeners and viewers, Danielle, Chris, feel free to put my contact info if there's any, like the show notes or anything like that. I'd love to hear from people. All this reporting is really possible because of people reaching out to me. I think people maybe not realize how little people reach out to journalists. If something's going on, I'm really just standing on the shoulders of the people that tell me about it. So I'd love to hear from your listeners and your viewers if there are concerns that they have for things in their communities as well.
Perfect. We will absolutely include that in the show notes. And also, there was something else I was going to include in the show notes. Oh, the link to your 121, your article.
Sure.
I'll include that as well.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you
Take care.
so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks. Chris, I'm just so thankful. I've told you this before, that he is the kind of guy that's got the boldness to put his microphone in some of these people's faces and ask them the tough questions.
Yes, and he does it in a way that's not, not offensive, not disrespectful, but it's very clear, very candid, and I think he's just a tremendous forensic investigator. And, actually, you and I have benefited so much from information that Drew has gathered. So very, very powerful to have him on today. And we've just got to have him back on soon. We could have spent, the entire hour today, Danielle, just talking about the Public Service Commission and even just the recent maneuverings and the recent vote at the PSC. There's so many tentacles to this. But one thing that I do believe from a political point of view is that citizens are waking up about this. People understand exactly what is going on here. And I think with continued public awareness, I believe that there will be some political casualties associated with this. I strongly believe that, because it is absolutely bizarre that we would live in a day and age in which people who were elected to represent citizens of this state would be sworn to these secrecy agreements that prohibit them from discussing things that directly and profoundly affect the people they represent. And they're doing the bidding of big corporations, not the people who voted for them. I find that not only reprehensible, but really revolutionary. I've never seen it in my life.
What's so disgusting to me, Chris, is the level at which our top politicians are willing to prostitute this state for a dime. I mean, literally for almost nothing. When you look at, I was so shocked yesterday, and this happens to me, and I even said it during the reflection this morning. How can you be shocked every single day at something that your government is doing to screw you over, to screw somebody over, to beat the little guy into the ground? It's unstinking believable. But the way that these politicians get so enamored by the elite that Drew was talking about, Zuckerberg or Zuckerberg's attorneys or whoever, Elon Musk, I don't care who they are. Who do you serve? And what these people are showing me, Chris, what Governor Landry is showing me, what Jay Morris is showing me, what anyone who signed these NDAs and stands to profit off of their knowledge is showing me is that they work for themselves. They work for the highest bidder, not the people who put them in office, not the person down the street, not the person that's bagging their groceries. So I think everyone has, like you said, woken up to that. People are waking up left, right, and center. The more these projects come in and just steamroll our state, the more people are not going to tolerate it. And I think, it's worth being concerned about. It's worth being concerned that people are reaching their breaking point, because you can only take so much from people. But now people's bills are piling up. They're not going to have any water. They're going to be paying the electricity for this AI data center that they don't want. They're paying more for their kids to go to school in the same place with the same or less education quality. They're paying more for the fire department that can't even get to their house if something's happening because they have to prioritize this massive data center that will burn the whole state down if something goes wrong. Where is the line, Chris? Where is the line?
The line has been reached. The line has been reached, and it is there. There's going to be, and we're seeing it now, major backlash here, Danielle, because these public officials have sold out the citizens of Louisiana. There is no question. They have made their bed, and they're sleeping with the enemy. There's no question about that. Every concession that it's possible to make to big tech has been made by our state. They're getting everything that they want, and they're not being required to do anything, nothing binding that would benefit the state of Louisiana. No question about it. And I think that, like I said, it is absolutely bizarre that this would be occurring in our state. I just can't believe it. So the battle lines, Danielle, have been drawn here. No doubt about it. If you want to come to Louisiana and you want to build a massive industrial project here of whatever kind, of whatever nature, sell it to the people who are going to be the most directly affected by it. Give them the information, give them assurance that what you say is actually true, whether it's in terms of the energy costs it's going to require, the jobs it's going to create, the boom that it's going to cause for the state. Give them the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You have no right in a constitutional republic, in a democrat society, to impose something of this magnitude on Louisiana citizens and keep them in the dark while you're doing it. And then finally let them know at the 11th hour when it's too late to do anything about it. That's the thing that is so oppressive and so angering, frankly, about this, Danielle. I've never, ever seen anything like this in my life, and I hope that there is great political backlash because of all of this.
I think there will be. I think there will be extraordinary political backlash for this, Chris. But I just can't get over how little these people think about the state, how little they think about the people that are being affected by this. I just put out a new article last week that I'd been talking about with Louisiana as a dumping ground. I'll drop a link to it in the show notes as well for people who are interested in looking at that. But I just said, what kind of person sets their own house on fire while they're in it? That's what we're living through, Chris. Governor Landry and the politicians are setting our house on fire.
Well, they are. But I think you could make an argument that they're not really setting their own houses on fire.
That's true.
They're setting the houses of the people who are going to be directly and profoundly affected for good or for bad because of this. Their houses are being set on fire. They're refurbishing their house. You know, they're creating buffers in their own home. They're not going to be directly affected over the long haul because
well,
of
if
this.
if the water supply is damaged, if you destroy the entire state, not that they don't have plans to parachute out to somewhere else like Florida or Texas, which I'm sure they probably, maybe already have homes there.
Yes. It's going to, Danielle, on one of our, I'll be honest with you, it reminds me of Steve Miller. Go on, take the money and run. And that's basically what they are doing here. And we're just going to continue to harp on this, continue to raise public awareness about it. Because if there's one issue, I think, that will define the current political state of affairs in Louisiana, it is precisely what we've been talking about. Government secrecy and the failure to hold these big corporations accountable for what they're saying and to get the data and the information that verifies it. And I cannot help but believe this is not going to end well for these politicians, Danielle. This is not going to end well.
No, it's not. All right, well, let me do a couple of announcements, Chris. Tomorrow on For the Love of Freedom, my friend Mary will be joining me again. People had really great feedback when she joined me the first time. This time she's going to be talking about the roots of the Democrat Socialist Alliance, or DSA, communism in America, and how that rise or resurgence has been set up historically. So that'll be a really fascinating conversation. She's been digging into the roots of the Weather Underground and where those people are now. So that'll be a fascinating conversation. She's a brilliant teacher too, so we'll learn a lot. And then Thursday we will have Chris Justin with us. He is the no party candidate for Public Service Commission District 1, and he actually chatted in to our show on Thursday, and I think our friend of the show, Rob Perry, got us connected with him. So looking forward to hearing what he has to say. But he has actually worked as a consultant for the PSC, so he has been a man behind the curtain, and I think it will be very telling to see what he has seen and what it is he wants to reform. So that will be a fantastic conversation on Thursday. I know we're both looking forward to that.
Very much so. And of course, he's running against Stephanie Hilferty.
Mm-hmm. And there's a Democrat in that race too.
Yeah, very much looking forward to talking to Chris on Thursday. That'll be very, very exciting. Well, Danielle, God bless you, and thank you once again for the opportunity to be with you today. I want to encourage people to join the State of Freedom, join the Warrior Circle, advertise with the State of Freedom, and of course support LCAG, the Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, as we continue to battle the giants in our state legislature. And one of the big issues this next session will be to statutorily repeal these non-disclosure agreements and make sure that we have transparency once again in our government. That will be a top priority among others. So support us at lacag.org so that we can continue to level the playing field there. And God bless all of our supporters who currently exist, both for LCAG and the State of Freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. You can join the Warrior Circle at join.freedomstate.us. And then two last quick announcements. Dr. Randy Russ will be joining us in Houma on Thursday. Our legislative committee leaders will be giving us an update on how our legislature did according to We the People's priorities this session. And then Dr. Russ will be talking about the latest on election integrity. So if you're in the neighborhood, join us at 6 o'clock at the Plantation Inn. We'd love to see you there. RSVP at WTPBayou.org. And then the Storm Summit early next month, September 10th through 13th. Chris and I will be there covering it live, and just a fantastic lineup of speakers, people that you have seen here. You'll get to shake their hands and listen to them live if you join us. So if you're interested, stormsummit.us.
I'm looking forward to the Storm Summit, Danielle, and I absolutely love We the People. I often say that if every advocacy group in Louisiana were like We the People, we would solve our problems here in 48 hours. God bless We the People, and we will see you again on Thursday, Danielle.
All right. See you, Chris. Have a great one.
Take care. Fuego, it's just unbelievable. Whether it's the flame-grilled carne asada or a signature mango margarita, I had one of those too. They're serving up a literal feast of freedom at Calle Fuego. It's just extraordinary. I love the owners, Andres and Jose. They run such a great restaurant. The service is extraordinary. The atmosphere is great. So if you're in Pineville in the Alexandria area or passing through, or if you live there, go to Calle Fuego and tell them the State of Freedom sent you. Blanco Brothers has been in business in Louisiana for about 30 years now. I have personal experience with this company, and I know others who have as well. If you have a business or a home and you've got roofing, gutter, sheet metal issues at all, one number you need to know, and that's Blanco Brothers Construction. He will treat you right financially, and he will take very good care of you with regard to the quality of the service that he provides. I cannot recommend Blanco Brothers Construction more highly enough. Memorize the number 225-226-4222. Blanco Brothers Construction, the very best in the business.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Any follow-up actions, resources, and links to our sponsors will be in the show notes. All calls to action can be taken at lacag.org. That's LACAG.org.
To learn more about our work, become a monthly subscriber, supporter, or advertiser at freedomstate.us. The State of Freedom, the #1 conservative.